All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for board development. My name is Kate Sugg, and I am a program administrator with the Westchester County Youth Bureau. I ask that you please mute your microphones. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to enter them right into the chat. Also, we are recording the session, and the recording will be added to the video library located on our website. And our website is youth.westchestergov.com. I would now like to turn it over to our presenter for this morning, Ann Turner with Ann Turner Consulting.
Thank you, Kate. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for making the time to be here this morning. I'm looking forward to our chat. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Like Kate said, my name's Ann Turner. I have a small nonprofit focused consultancy called Ann Turner Consulting. I work with a lot of mid-size and small nonprofits in the Metro New York City area and beyond, helping them address a lot of challenges that often ends up focusing on strategic planning and board development. So a lot of the things we're going to talk about today. I've been working with nonprofits and consulting, and I co-founded a nonprofit called PenPack. So I've been doing this nonprofit work for about the last 10 years. And I also have an MBA. So prior to my nonprofit work, I did a lot of private sector work related to consulting and marketing. So that's enough about me. Let's get started. So I assume everybody is here because they're interested in board development. And I think pretty much every nonprofit, board development and just maintaining and getting the most out of your board is a really critical part of being a successful nonprofit. So we have a few areas we're going to talk about today that are building blocks: recruitment and onboarding, and board engagement, training board members, getting their skills up, and then specifically thinking about skills and training in the area of fundraising. And if we have a chance, we'll also talk about strategic oversight. That's another key responsibility area for board members. Just briefly, in terms of our session today, I encourage people to stay on screen if you can. If you have questions, please put them in the chat as we go. I've got 10 minutes set aside at the end to cover questions. Stay on mute, please, if you can, when you're not speaking. And if you think of ideas of, resources or practices that have been effective at your organization, anything that strikes a note with you as I go through the presentation, please keep the chat going. Feel free to make a note in the chat, share links to resources that you found to be effective, etc. So we may be virtual, but I like to try and keep as much of a dialogue going as possible. Before I get started, I'm interested in just hearing a little bit from you all. And if you think about your organization, some of the challenges that your board is facing, can you type something in the chat? It'd just be interesting to get a representation from each of you. Maybe some of the challenges and things that you're thinking about, something you might want to get out of the session, challenges that you're experiencing in your organization's board. We'll just take a minute and type something in the chat. Hopefully people have something in mind. I'm sure everybody's board experiences some challenges. Well, I saw one coming through. I saw somebody's interested in fundraising. You see anything there, Kate?
Yes, and we have having a board involved in all aspects of our service areas and fundraising.
Yeah, that's always important.
We also have inviting new members to join, so recruitment. Someone commented, just starting to think about who to invite to join the board.
Mm-hmm.
Looking for ways to engage a board.
Yeah.
Keeping it streamlined and as efficient as possible.
Okay, good.
Another comment on ways to engage.
Mm-hmm.
And understanding concerning board responsibilities.
Yep.
and where to start with regard to appointing advisory board members, training, and getting members on the same page.
Okay.
And we have
Excellent.
one comment, creating diversity on the board, a differentiated skill base.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. Thanks. Okay, well, good. I think we're going to touch on just about all of those things today. I guess the only one area we're not really going to get into is the advisory board, which is a separate type of board than a board of directors. Be happy to talk about that another time. I am a fan of advisory boards for the right people. And I think the rest of pretty much all those questions we will get into. If you think of questions as we go along, though, please pop them in the chat. Kate will be monitoring them, and I'll do my best to get to all of them at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and keep going here. So let's just start at the beginning of the board process, board recruitment. And some people already kind of mentioned you're thinking about those things. I mean, it's an ongoing thing. Even if your organization's been around for a long time, board members ebb and flow. So you're kind of always looking to supplement, to keep your board at a full level, and to be thoughtful as you do that, to bring on the right board members and kind of have the right mix of people and have your board be as strong as possible. So as you start thinking about board recruitment, I would suggest you think about 3 different areas for board members. Think about their skills, think about their capacity, and think about their perspectives. So let's go in and drill down on each of those areas. So, for skills, certainly one of the first areas you're going to think about is professional skills. Often people are thinking, want to make sure you've got a finance person, you've got a legal person, maybe somebody who's knowledgeable about fundraising and marketing. Those are all like important building blocks for your board to have. So I recommend thinking strategically in each of those areas. Think about your current board skill set and what might be missing. One area that I feel like is often neglected is trying to find a couple board members from your nonprofit sector. Those people can provide a really valuable perspective and knowledge, just understanding your programming and the strategy of where your organization is going. So that's another area that I encourage people to look at. And then you also are looking for skills in terms of those officer positions. So somebody's got the right skill set to serve as a board chair, just kind of in terms of the succession and this pipeline of always trying to have people on your board that can be rising up in the ranks. So you're thinking about the board chair position, the treasurer position. Obviously, that's a very important position in terms of financial oversight. And a secretary position, that's just understanding the governance of a nonprofit. So, you can look at for a portfolio of skills across board members. One tool that can be useful is a board matrix. So sometimes, you can set up a spreadsheet that's a matrix of your current members, and then, kind of going across the axis, what are the different like vertical skills that they have. And then you can make a list of the maybe candidates that you're considering and think about their skill set and try and match it up and try and find people strategically who can help fill any skill gaps that you have. So then the other piece of board member recruitment is capacity, because it's not quite enough if somebody has incredible skill set, but they just don't have the time or the will to give your organization the mind share that your board deserves. Then you're still not getting the full impact of each board member seat that you want to fill. So, time and mind share for strong engagement. I think that's equally important. And when you think about strong engagement, I mean, first of all, board meetings. I suggest as you're recruiting people, I mean, typically boards meet the same day of the week and the same time of day, whether it's monthly or quarterly. And, you just want to kind of make sure that that's a fit. If you meet on the second Wednesday at 5 o'clock from 5 to 7 every night, you want to be clear about that expectation so that you have somebody that's a fit with when your boards meet. But also there's more to it, of course, than the board meeting. So, you want somebody who can have the mind share to like review all of the materials that come in advance and do work in between meetings and be prepared to come to your meetings ready to vote and help make decisions. And then there's also committees. I encourage all board members to be actively involved in at least one committee. And so the committees are often the groups getting the work done in between the meetings. So providing the information for the board to review and be ready to vote on. And sometimes committees meet, if a board meets quarterly, maybe the committees meet monthly. So just people that have the ability to actively be involved in that. And then there's fundraising, assisting in fundraising, and that's something we'll get more into today. You want people who have the bandwidth to help with that. And then there's event attendance. So you want all of your board members at your major event and certainly some at more minor events. As well as potentially capacity down the road to serve in an officer role. So that's kind of the capacity piece in terms of time, but then financially, and each organization can be different financially. So, your organization can decide what you think is appropriate to ask of your board members. But when you've decided, you want to try and evaluate and look at potential board members. You feel like they could meet those expectations. It could be, a personally significant financial gift of their own. It could be sharing their network and making asks amongst their network for their network to be making financial contributions. Or it could be in-kind contributions from somebody who helps fill in a big volunteer role, or may be able to refer resources within their network that are in the field that your nonprofit serves in. So a lot of different ways, but that's an important piece to think about too, while you're in this recruitment phase. And then I also want to mention perspectives. So just, you do want a diversity of perspectives and backgrounds from across your board. And that can also factor into this board matrix piece, so it's not just professional skills, it's reflecting different perspectives. And you want people who are familiar with your service area and the constituents that you're serving. That may be somebody who works in your field. It may be somebody who has potentially even, come from the community and may even have received some of your services. I know some really strong board members who have been people who have risen up from the ranks, like maybe they started in a youth development type of program and then they got in their late 20s and they really wanted to give back. Or maybe, parents and family members of children who have been through your program. So there's a lot of different ways to look for that piece. And I think nonprofits are starting to think more about it, but it has been historically kind of underserved and neglected, I think. And then finally, from everybody, regardless of what skill set and perspective they bring, you want somebody who's really passionate about your mission and committed to it. So just, when we're like just little boxes, you want to make sure, try and find people who are checking all of those boxes. So, when you've identified what you're looking for, then how can you find them? So this is a big process, and I encourage senior staff and all board members to kind of work together on that, where everybody, kind of start with this brainstorming of, thinking about your spheres of influence among all of these people, starting with professionally. So you've got your colleagues and professional associations that people are members of, thinking about partner organizations for your organization, funders, and then just like taking a look through your LinkedIn pages. People have so many, like acquaintances and, people within their network that may not be the people that come to mind straight away, but they could be very strong people who would be interested in your organization. As well as thinking about, it could be constituents who have been served by your organization, friends, family, various degrees of different types of acquaintances as you think about different spheres of influence within your networks. And then don't overlook local businesses and community leaders who are all kind of partnering in different levels and have some degree of interaction with your organization and could have an interest. So I would also just kind of give a reminder here that, as you're doing this recruitment and you're looking for board members, this is kind of the root of getting a diverse and equitable and inclusive board. It starts with the recruitment, and the people you recruit and bring on, they're going to become the composition of your board. So, I just want to put an extra plug in here that be mindful and thoughtful. Most boards have a fair bit of work to do to become more diverse and representative of the communities that they're serving. So, just be thoughtful about that as you're starting the process. And then kind of continuing the process, I mean, there could be a lot of cultivation work as you identify potential candidates that you're interested in. Some of them might be kind of a shoo-in, they might be like some good friends of some of your board members and they've already been to some of your events and so forth. But sometimes it can be, for maybe more acquaintance level and people that have not been as close within your networks, including candidates that can bring some more diversity into your organization. It can take some more cultivation because people need to really get to know your organization, the people, the mission, and understand why it's so special. So it can certainly be a process. So you want to think about steps and ways to start engaging with these people and introduce them to more of your staff and your board members and more of your events and help them understand your strengths and your successes and why they might be interested in committing their time and energy into being part of your board. So, things like, there could be big events to small events. I mean, sometimes you have like a small EV coffee chat kind of thing, or volunteer opportunities, or program related events that are closer to the mission, ways to help people. So you're not really asking them for money right away. You're trying to cultivate a relationship and help them get to know your organization and its successes. So just thinking strategically about how you can do that, not focusing on the money, and being patient and trying to build those relationships. Then I would say, as you're coming through this cultivation process and you're starting to talk more specifically about inviting someone to be on the board, I also think it's important to make sure that the expectations of what your board and your organization is looking for are clear to the potential candidate and that your expectations are aligned. So that's another piece of success of, bringing on board members where these expectations are clear, they're aligned, and, not only is somebody excited about your organization, they're excited about meeting the expectations of being a board member and making a contribution. So one way to do that is to develop a roles and responsibilities document and kind of have your governance committee think through, what are those expectations you kind of want to be willing to put down on paper? Like what's your policy around board meeting attendance, around event attendance, around committee participation, financial commitment, and, possibly even for smaller, less staffed organizations, maybe you ask for some programmatic support, like interviewing some of the youth candidates for certain programs or something, or resume review, things like that. So it's good to kind of spell that out clearly in a roles and responsibilities document, share it with candidates as you're really moving into the final recruitment phase. And then develop that into a board agreement that's, states the kind of, is just another document stating the roles and responsibilities. And it's something that part of your board process becomes to share this with board members each year and ask them to kind of re-up and sign it because, people have been on a board for a few years, they kind of forget about it, or, if you're not being more organized, then sometimes the culture just tends, these things kind of start to like go by the wayside and slack off a little bit. So I encourage you to find a set of expectations that you're comfortable with, get it in writing, and just make that part not a big deal, but just part of the annual governance process. So at the beginning of each board year, you send it out to everybody, you ask them to sign it and return it to you. Just a best practice that I would recommend. And it often slips by the wayside. It can be hard to do. So I encourage you to kind of put the extra little bit of energy into making that happen. And okay, so let's talk about onboarding now. So you've been thoughtful and you've kind of identified some great candidates and you've found people that are a good match and they're on board with your expectations. So the next step is to really integrate them effectively into your organization. Welcome them, share a lot of information about your organization, integrate them into committees, and help them feel knowledgeable, like they have the right tools to be confident about decision making and being actively engaged and really getting into the fabric of your organization. I recommend sharing, like, maybe a shared drive, really for all board members. And then it's especially an important tool to direct new board members onto. So, you've got your financial reports. Maybe your organization does a program report, something that's sharing, status update on program happenings. You've got your bylaws, your committee charters, like your boards and responsibility sheet, minutes from, say, maybe the last year of board meetings, and the conflict of interest statement. So some of that's a little more mundane, like the bylaws and the conflict of interest statement, and then some of it's a little more, active things that board members should be, like, reviewing through and be well aware of as they're going into board meetings. So, it's having it there. It's having a process to send the link out with the email before, after people join and before board meetings, to encourage people to be reviewing it. All of which are just tools and reminders for practices to get people actively involved, and have a process for people to ask questions. So one way to do that is to have a board buddy. I think that, each new board member could get paired with an existing board member, and I would suggest it be somebody that they don't already know very well. So it just creates another relationship within the board. And, it's a little more meaningful when you get a personal email from your buddy, like, say, before the first few board meetings. Say, hey, just want to check in, make sure you've got this on your calendar. I look forward to seeing you at the board meeting. And if board meetings should happen to be in person, then it's nice to, like, meet that person face to face and sit next to them. But it's still an effective tool if the board meetings are virtual. And then somebody who can kind of say, hey, have you read over the materials? Do you have any questions before the board meeting? Check in with them after the board meeting. Like, you just want to see if you have any questions on, any of the materials that we covered, or how the meeting was run, particularly if it may be somebody's first board meeting. I mean, I have just interacted with, like, a lot of very smart young people, and sometimes I think everybody kind of feels like, oh, everybody knows what's going on. I'm supposed to know what to do. Okay, I'll just vote in support of this. But not everybody does. So just really trying to provide that support and space for people to ask questions, and, make sure they understand the financials and they feel comfortable asking questions if they don't. And then the other piece of kind of integrating and onboarding new members is committee assignments, and that's super important. So trying to talk to people about, what areas of interest do they have, and think about their skill set. Given their skill set, you may have had a committee in mind for them, and that may have already been part of the discussion before they came on. But just trying to, introduce them to the committee chair, make sure they kind of know when the regular committee meetings are, and just, if you help get them integrated into the committee as quickly as possible, because I think probably as much or more work gets done in the committees than just in terms of the general board meetings. So you really want to get them engaged in a committee that they feel comfortable with. And then one more piece in terms of the board member, I mean, kind of beyond the recruitment phase, just I want to talk about equity and inclusion for a minute, even though this is like a whole nother section. I mean, we could have a whole section just talking about that, of course, but I just wanted to take a minute and focus on equity inclusion. Just after you're thoughtful about recruiting board members and bringing them on and trying to have an equitable and inclusive board members, then you also want to just think about, like, your practices and making sure that your board members also observing these practices and helping to really integrate everybody, all your board members in, so that it's an equitable and inclusive experience for everybody. So just, some things to think about. Think about which voices are centered in your meetings, and what are the opportunities for those voices to be heard? How transparent is your decision making? Do you have an articulated commitment for racial equity? Are you holding yourself accountable for incorporating a racial equity lens into your board and your organization's activities and norms and policies? Do you have a culture that's welcoming everybody as a fully valued and authorized board member? And then, do you have sufficient support for all of your board members to make sure they understand their oversight responsibility, especially for people when it's their first board? So you just, that kind of goes back to the onboarding and the board buddies, There's a lot of people who have so much to contribute to a board, but it may be their first board, and they want to understand their fiduciary responsibility and reviewing how to review your financials, and what is behind the nature of some of the votes that might come up before the board. So it's just trying to be intentional in thinking about that. Another important piece is just kind of going along with the committees that I've already alluded to, is that the committees are super important. So as you get beyond the board recruiting and you're thinking about engagement and having your board run as an effective, efficient organization that's really getting the work done, I just want to emphasize that committees really are the engine that keeps your board running. So they get the work done in between meetings. So you're kind of getting, extra leverage. There's meetings, and that's kind of where the assignments take place. And then board members are kind of tasked with getting something done and reporting back. Most of that kind of work is really happening in your committees. And that's how the committees are then able to provide materials to your board, like as needed, for the next boarding meeting when there's a decision to be made. So they're really important, and I think just being intentional about setting up the committees, getting a chair, having those committees have set schedules of regular meetings, and taking on the work within their jurisdiction is a really important way of helping to move the needle and helping your board feel like it's accomplishing things. I would just reiterate that, I think all board members should be actively serving on at least one committee, and it's not unusual for people to be on two committees. I mean, a lot of boards are small and they've got a lot of work to get done. So, I mean, you're not going to be chairing two committees, but I don't think it's too much for some people who want to take that on. Another kind of committee, secret weapon that I would suggest is that many committees can have members on them who are not board members. It depends on your bylaws, and for example, governance often is something that would just be board members. But for a number of other areas, it could be program, it could be like a fundraising committee or an ad hoc gala preparation committee. I mean, those are great ways for people that are active within your organization to get involved. It could be people who are not looking for that commitment of a board member. It also is a great way to identify future board members. So, I do recommend one of the boards I'm on every year, we set a goal that, each of the committees where it's acceptable anyway, gets, we're also a membership organization, but gets at least a few non-board members. And it's really powerful. It's a great recruitment tool, and it really helps expand the bandwidth of the committee. So that's something that not everybody thinks about, that I recommend you keep in mind and look outside your board for some strength there as well. So let's just talk a little bit more about committees. You may be some small organizations where you don't have a lot of committees. So, I'm not going to take that for granted. As you think across nonprofits and what's typical, I would say that, well, first of all, there is normally an executive committee that's got your officers, your treasurer and your board chair and your secretary and the executive director, not sometimes somebody else. So you have an executive committee. Typically, there's a governance chaired by the secretary. There will be a finance committee chaired by the treasurer. Often there's a fundraising or a resource development committee. And, less often, but maybe in a bigger organization, a marketing and communications committee, which, I think is actually pretty key and pretty helpful. But if you're a smaller group, another way to look at it could be just trying to get two committees, one that's internal. So you're focusing on the most essential areas. You've got finance and governance, just of overseeing the organization and keeping your board operating. And then you could have externally just one group that handles everything that's external, from fundraising and all kinds of your marketing and communications. So you don't have to, if you have a small board, you don't have to, create a bunch of committees and then have the same few people be on all the committees. You want to set up something that works for you. If you Google it, there's a lot of information about, different committees and their role. But, I encourage you, even if you're a small, new organization, set up a couple committees and like be formal about getting people staffed on each of those committees and what the expectations are for them. So you're never too small to have effective committees. And then another piece of board engagement that I want to talk about, going beyond the committees, and something that I feel like can be overlooked by some nonprofits, is mission familiarity. And I think having your board members be familiar with your mission and kind of like, some of the like more recent successes and the activities, especially like with COVID, a lot of things with programs changed. So keeping your board members like up to date and familiar with it, and sharing with them some of your recent successes is a really effective tool. It engages your board members and it motivates them to want to do more, including in the fundraising area, because they just feel more confident about the nature of the work that you're doing. I feel like that can come from more interaction with the staff that doesn't always happen as much as it could. And I feel like sometimes there, is maybe a misunderstanding and even sometimes animosity. Like the staff are kind of like, why isn't the board raising more money? And the board is kind of like, well, why are they asking us to do it? I don't know what the staff is doing. One best practice I would suggest is to periodically have different staff members pop into a board meeting and maybe take 20 minutes and talk about their job and the program that they're involved in. One client I have is doing like a day in the life of an advocate. It's a sexual assault, domestic violence organization, and they do some very heart-wrenching and really important work. And I think it was really impactful to the board to hear about the work that the group had been doing recently, to hear a success story of maybe a particular case of, what one battered woman and all the steps that they took with her and how they were able to change her life. There's a lot of important work going on, and whatever, would work for your organization, just kind of trying to keep in mind to build bridges between your board and staff. And even if your board members have been there for a long time, try and like keep it fresh for them, an understanding of the work that your organization is doing and the successes that you're having. Just like if you had a gala, it's always really impactful if you bring in somebody who's, a success story, who's been through your program. Like people love to hear that. And, it's very helpful for board members as well. So I would just say that, I've already kind of gone through a lot of material. We have a lot of material here. I'm happy to take questions as I get to the end. I know I've gone quickly through a lot, but, I think those steps of being mindful during the recruitment and the onboarding and thinking about diversity and equity and thinking about how you can engage board members, those are all really important steps. So, and it's a cycle. So as soon as you've kind of gotten through it, then, the next year is coming back around and maybe a couple board members are resigning and it's time to do it all again. So, I would just say it's a cycle to stay on top of. Just look at it as a cycle. The other piece that we're not discussing today is succession planning for your officers, which is a similar cycle. It takes a lot to maintain a board. So I think the best way to look at it is just that it is this ongoing process and it keeps going and you want to stay on top of it. So let's shift gears and talk about training for a little bit in terms of if you think about skill building. You also want to always be building your board members' skills. There's various training opportunities to help with that. And then, fundraising is a particular area where it's nice to help build board members' skills. Training, I want to talk about a couple of areas. The board chair training is one training that I did want to highlight that, that's a big role. And sometimes it's people's maybe their first time being a board chair on a nonprofit board. That I have seen there's a group called the Support Center for Nonprofits that's in New York City, but I know they had a group in Westchester recently where it was like a board chair cohort that they offered. So, if it's nice to think if you can find some kind of a training opportunity for your board officers, it's nice to help them get those skills because it's a pretty big job being a board chair. And then in addition to that, I mean, it's nice to find ways to strengthen the skills of your entire board. And the areas where I see people focusing are typically fundraising and DEI training. So, the DEI training is really expanded. There's a lot more and kind of more thorough trainings available. It's also an ongoing process, as I'm sure all of you know. So it's not something that if you just come in and do a day of DEI training, everybody's got it. So that is also like a process that's very ongoing. And I've been part of a number of sessions with what I thought were very talented facilitators, and kind of it can help bring a group together when you go through that process together. So that's an area that I think is very valuable and important for boards to work on. And then when you think about kind of options for how can you do this training, sometimes I feel like people get stuck because like, oh, like, we don't have the money for a big 2-day training session. And I'm on a couple of boards that are relatively small organizations that are not highly funded, and then I've seen some resourceful strategies for bringing in training. Some organizations have an annual retreat, and so you could, that's just a good time when you have your organization. Maybe it's a full day, whether it's a weekday or a weekend, and you have people's mind sharing time. So that's a good opportunity, even if you just bring in something that's like an hour or two, or if you're able to get funding and you do something for a full day. If you kind of have that on the calendar so that your board members expect, like, that's part of their commitment, they're doing an annual retreat, that's a great opportunity when you have more of people's time. But I feel like you could also do it in smaller doses where, I was actually a board that I'm on, we had somebody come on and we have a big gala coming up, and we had a fantastic fundraising consultant come on. It was probably like 30 or 40 minutes. It was, pretty quick part of our 2-hour board meeting. And she was fantastic. And she really got everybody fired up, kind of understanding and be more motivated and more comfortable with their role to go out and, invite people to, support or buy tickets and attend the gala. So, that's an example of how, even in a very small way, you could get something done within your board meeting. Or you could just have a special training session. So maybe it's like an hour or two Zoom session that you offer that's, late in the afternoon, or, some other time when you can reach people. So I just, I've worked with a lot of small nonprofits, and I think a number of you all probably are from small nonprofits. So, I just want to encourage people to find ways to fit things in with the time and budget that can work for your organization. And I know there are grants. So, I mean, yes, you can certainly look at grants and, maybe for something bigger too, like DEI, so that it could be a series of sessions. Something like that would be well done by funded by a grant. But there's also pro bono and volunteer type of ways too. Just your board and your staff may have contacts of somebody who would give their time and come do a session for you. I see that happen all the time. As well as pro bono organizations. I mean, if you're familiar with Catch a Fire and Taproot Plus, I've seen some good work come out of that. And they're very just like these decentralized organizations where you can connect directly with one of their volunteers on a specific project for your organization, and then they kind of just match you up and get out of the way, and then you can talk with them about what you're looking for. So those are interesting resources to explore as well. Okay, I think that's it for training. If anybody has training questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. But I'm gonna move on and talk about fundraising. So fundraising, I do feel like it's not always board members' favorite responsibility, but I feel like it's an important role for board members. More and more funding is coming from individual donations. And board members are your best group of go-to people to help try and find some of those individuals within their network. This is just an interesting statistic. If you look back at U.S. charitable giving in 2020, between foundations, and corporations, individuals, and bequests, the most significant part of that came from individuals. So that was almost 70%. Whereas I think often people think, oh, like, foundations and grants, like, in terms of charitable giving, not government giving, but, you might think of like corporations and private foundations giving grants, like that as being a bigger piece of it, but it's really individuals. But there are many nonprofits and there is a lot of asking going on. So there's a lot of money out there, but it is a competitive process. So you want to, you want to have your board like kind of understand the responsibility and try and help them get comfortable with it and try and train them and give them some tools to help out with it. So what are some opportunities of when you might ask board members to help with this fundraising aspect? I'd say things have been a little different with COVID over the last 2 years. But there's still, the structure that, whether they were virtual or not. I mean, I think nonprofits typically have some kind of a major event, that may be a gala or it may be something else. Some organizations have additional smaller events, could be a walkathon or maybe just like a little, like evening chat with the executive director on a smaller basis. One organization I'm a part of, they have an author luncheon because it's a literacy organization, so they'll just have like a smaller luncheon. And then most organizations have the year-end giving when you kind of want to encourage people to support the year-end giving. So obviously there's a lot of different touch points, and people can kind of pick and choose when they think is the best opportunity to make asks of different people within their network. I want to also just share a little bit about it, because getting back to the fact that I think for some board members, people feel uncomfortable talking about money, asking for money. But I mentioned the board session I was on recently where this fundraising consultant did such a great job. One of the exercises she did was trying to kind of talk about why is it uncomfortable to ask for money? And she kind of asked the group, like, how do you feel about talking about money? How do you feel about asking for money? And most of the responses, it was very interesting, but as you would expect, I mean, most people were kind of like, yeah, I don't really like to talk about money, and I don't feel like comfortable with it. It's not really my favorite thing. And then she flipped the coin and she said, how do you feel about giving money? And then people were kind of like, yeah, I feel okay about giving money. Like, I like to give money to causes that I care about. Like, I feel pretty good about that. And it kind of made all of us in our group realize people actually often don't mind giving money. That may be a positive experience for them, even though it feels uncomfortable for the people asking. So I'm just kind of trying to illustrate this maybe as a way, like a type of training you might be able to do with your board. And it could be just even without bringing in, a consultant or something, but just something to kind of have a brainstorming session with your board, before maybe an event or a time that when you really want to ask them to make a push to get engaged and do some fundraising, to just realize that, a lot of people enjoy giving money, and they give money for different reasons, like different things that motivate them. So when your board is thinking about different people within their network that they might ask and different types of asks they could make, you can think about, so why do different people like to give money? Like, some people will do it for the relationship because it's you're a good friend and they want to support you, kind of whatever you're asking for. Some people might do it because they're really interested in your organization and its mission and the work that they're doing. Some people might do it just because it feels great to take action and feel like you're fighting a social problem and it's empowering. Some people might do it like to kind of pay it forward. They see they're going to get something out of it, get their name in a sponsorship ad or something, and it looks appropriate for their career. But they want to do it, that's motivating for them. Some people might do it kind of pay to play, like, I'll sponsor your organization if you sponsor mine. Some people do it for the image. They want to be, a certain tier of a giver, and it feels great to have your name out there and see that, you're giving at that level. But whatever it is, I mean, just it's good for your board members to kind of have this, background training and knowledge, and to understand that, some people a lot of people enjoy giving, and to understand these different reasons that might factor into how your board members can make asks for financial support. So it's also helpful then, if you're asking your board to embark on helping with fundraising, them to do some brainstorming around their network. Think about all their different social spheres of influence, and different types of friends and acquaintance, different people that they might make different asks of. And then you also want to give them some tools, like if they're going to be like emailing and contacting people and then speaking to them about this organization, you want to encourage them to speak as frequently as possible, and kind of have an elevator pitch ready to go. Like you could do a little session during a board meeting, having people practice their elevator pitch. And then whether somebody on the board or somebody in your development staff can provide like a sample email letter language that you might use in contacting your friends and saying, hey, we've got this event coming up. I hope you can support the organization. We'd love to see you buy tickets and come, or perhaps you can support it financially. So those are just good, helpful tools to help your board members feel more comfortable in reaching out. You could also, especially for some younger people, I mean, you could also give them like the link and encourage them to set up a peer-to-peer fundraising page, like Give Lively as a platform that's really easy to use. So, maybe if they want to craft a certain ask, like I'm hoping to raise $2,000 for the upcoming event, and ask people to click on the link and go to their page, and then people kind of feel good. They see their friends' names and their name gets on the page. And that kind of gets back to like what motivates people, what would be fun, what would motivate people in a way that they would enjoy giving, like would they enjoy giving through that kind of a page. So, those are just like some different tools and some different ways that you can encourage your board members to think about asking, like who they're going to ask and what type of ask are they going to make of different people. But just you want to have them realize like it's cultivation. The more they talk about the organization to their network, like kind of even before, kind of on an ongoing basis before they're ready to make the ask, that all of that is really helpful. Follow up in this day and age is very expected and helpful, so people shouldn't feel shy about sending it along a couple times, maybe an update on who's going to be honored at the gala, or just touching base again. Just wanted to give you a little reminder. It's only a few weeks before the event. All of those kinds of things are like, tools that are good to remind your board members of, and that will help their fundraising efforts be more successful. In addition to the fact that, it's just can't hurt to remind them that you cannot thank people soon enough, and just show their appreciation for anybody within their network who is making a contribution. Okay, how are we doing for time? It's 11:20. So I think I'm going to save this piece on strategic oversight. I mean, there's a little, we were going to talk about just kind of how boards can be helpful in terms of strategic oversight and keeping the mission and vision of your organization fresh and up to date, and how that could feed into a strategic plan. But I think that that's probably better to hang on to for another session. How are we doing on questions, Kate? Do we have some questions?
Hi, Anne, we do have a question. Can you discuss briefly ways to run board meetings in the most efficient way?
Okay, absolutely. Great. So I'm just going to like wrap up here and summarize before I respond to that in 1 second. We talked about recruitment and onboarding, and we talked about board member engagement with committees and mission familiarity, and also kind of ensuring equity and inclusion as you're doing the recruitment and the onboarding and the engagement, and your overall board practices to help bring that to fruition. We talked about some training options, and we talked about fundraising. So if you have any questions along any of these topics and we have time, feel free to put them in. And I'm going to shift gears to questions. So in terms of effective tools for running an effective board meeting. That's a great question. I feel like that really feeds into some things that I've been talking about. So I suggest that you have a pretty specific and well-defined agenda in terms of topics, who's going to talk, and the time allotment, and then making sure that anybody who is kind of on the agenda and is expected to talk is like well aware of that and kind of comes prepared to speak to that so that you can stay on a tight schedule. Because I do think it's really important. You know, you ask a lot of board members. So however long your board meeting is, I think you want to be respectful of people's time and end on time. And you want people to feel like the meeting was a good use of their time and it's run efficiently and well. So if you have that agenda, you want to send that agenda out to people in advance. They can also get their head around and kind of be thinking about any potential decision areas and what's going to come up. Anybody who's presenting can submit, any materials people should review in advance. That's kind of part of the board packet that you send out in advance along with the agenda. So that kind of all this pre-work has been done, and then you stick to the agenda. And I mean, board meetings can be like a total like can of worms. I mean, the boards address a lot of material. So I fully understand how it could be really easy. Like any one topic could potentially kind of, if you let it go off the rails and like, maybe take up a lot of the rest of your session. So I do think it's like an important leadership role for the chair to keep on track. And then if something comes up that, is more difficult to, just more discuss or harder to get to a consensus, I think you can even ask the group and say, like, this feels important. I think it's going to take a little longer than I expected. Like, are people okay if we spend another 5 or 10 minutes on this? Potentially at the expense of some other agenda item that may be a lower priority that then you may not get to until the next time. So I think the more you can really carefully manage the agenda and the process, be respectful of people's time, and then kind of ask permission if you need to deviate and make a change, but make sure that you wrap up on time. That will go a long way.
Thank you, Anne. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll give you a minute to do that.
Also, if you don't have a question and you just want to share out, if you can think of a specific concept that you learned today from this discussion, so something that's kind of memorable for you that hopefully you'll be taking back with you to your organization, please call it out in the chat. That could be helpful for everybody. Like, just hopefully everybody got at least a couple nuggets today of something specific and actionable, so that this session, make this session worth your while and something you can take back and translate into something in your organization.
And I know that someone asked if we will be sharing the slides. So yes, after the presentation, I will share the slide deck, and it does contain Anne's email. So if anyone has questions after the presentation, please feel free to reach out to me, or you can email Anne directly. We have a comment in the chat: invite a chair that already has board management experience. So Lane, I don't know if you want to expand, but I guess the question is how to do that when they're already, or I guess that's your comment. I'm sorry. Thank you. So to invite a chair that already has board management experience. Excellent. We have another one. We are onboarding 2 new board members this month, and I'm excited to create a great session for them along with assigning a board buddy, which is a great idea. So Anne, I think people like the board buddy idea, which is great.
Terrific. Yeah, I love the board buddy idea.
All right, great. And I see our executive director, Dr. Damia Harris-Madden, has joined us. Damia, thanks for joining us for the session. I see you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. First, Anne, I appreciate all the nuggets that you've learned today. I think it's very insightful, and people often struggle in managing their boards, actually creating and developing their boards. And as you mentioned, that continuous process loop that must occur in terms of training and succession and, reminding board members of your mission and vision. It's just all very relative to each organization, but generic in that, each entity will have to do these types of things, all of which you've mentioned, to have a really sound board. But I just wanted to make a comment because I see a few youth bureaus on the line, and I wanted to just reassure them. They probably have come to this conclusion already that everything you discussed, although it was not germane specifically to advisory boards, is really apropos for advisory boards. These are the types of things that we often discuss at the Westchester County Youth Board. Some of the needs we recognize exist, and they are clearly pointed out in this PowerPoint. But I just wanted to note that from the advisory board standpoint, obviously for government, we are unable to, suggest fundraising. We are incapable of doing that with our government boards. However, the influence, that sphere of influence that Anne mentioned, is really very important because advisory board members can utilize their networks and their social capital to help further youth bureaus and other government entity boards. I felt that I had to kind of chime in there because much of this information is really transferable. I know Michael is a new youth bureau, and we're so excited that Ossining has one now. And, for those that are on, Mount Vernon is on, and others, at least they were on, they struggle, and I can testify to this because we struggle at the county level, but also at a municipal level. We struggle to maintain board members, particularly since they kind of felt like, well, I'm not raising funds, I'm not involved in the programming, so to speak, because I'm here in an advisory capacity. What is it that I really do? Is this a good use of my time? And so I think the things that, Anne has outlined can be useful, and finding what their desires are. So when we talk about alignment with our boards, we need to find out from them why they actually want to be a part of our boards, understanding that it will be an advisory board, an appointed position, not so much, a position that requires all the things that a nonprofit board may require. I think early on that conversation needs to happen so that they are clear, because when most people hear boards, they think of, all of the, responsibilities of the nonprofit board. And while some of them may be transferable to the advisory board, I think the distinction has to be made clear. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation, given the number of youth bureaus in attendance today. But again, thank you, Anne, and I appreciate you, Kate, as well, for bringing Anne to the table to discuss such an important capacity building measure, which really will go, to support some of the nonprofits and youth bureaus that are trying their best to either create new boards or hold on to board members. Retention is a huge issue, and so some of these pointers are really useful. So thank you. Thank you.
Thanks
you
for
so
joining
much.
us, Dr. Harris-Madden.
Yes, thank you. And a follow-up to those comments, someone mentioned it's a great idea to explore those spheres of influence and centers of influence. So yes, thank you. All right, so if there are no other questions or comments, I would just like to thank you, Anne, for sharing all this great information with us. Thank you to everyone for joining us. I will be sending out a survey to get some feedback about today's session, but also to get ideas, topics that you're interested in for future professional development sessions. And I will also be sending out flyers for upcoming offerings that we have over the next few months. We will be hosting grant readiness next month, followed by budgeting basics in June. So if those interest you, please feel free to RSVP. You can email me directly. My email is kmh4@westchestergov.com. Again, I will be sending out flyers for those. So that's it. I just want to thank you all again, and have a great day.
Thanks for having me, Kate. I hope it was useful, everybody. It's nice being on with you. Take care.
It absolutely was. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Enjoy your
Bye.
day.
Thank you. We know there was a huge event today, so Anne, we appreciate you